Hi, I'm the Noob Woodworker, and today we're going to restore a Grizzly 1022 table saw.
First, we're going to start off with the removal of the front rail. To remove the front rail, you need to remove these 4 screws. The 2 in the middle just require a flathead screwdriver, but the 2 on the outside are going to take a ratchet. I've already removed the back rail a couple days earlier to see how simple it was. We won't be reusing these rails. I plan on installing a new table saw fence, one based on the designs by John Heiss. Here we're going to remove the table saw wings. Now they just take a ratchet. I haven't removed the rail yet because I forgot at this point that it took a ratchet to remove them. All these bolts were just snugged down, and once I loosened them up a little bit, I could just remove them with my fingers. I noticed there was no videos for how to disassemble this saw online, so a lot of this video is trial and error. I probably cut out about 3 hours of footage of me just screwing with this thing and making wrong attempts. The way this table saw fence was originally made was it had a lever that you cranked down on, and that would hold onto a rail on the front and the back. I'm not sure if there was any way to square it up, but it was all rusted up. It did have a knob on the front for making small incremental adjustments, but like I said, the thing never really worked properly. If you turn the wing on its side like this, you can hold its weight with one hand, and then you can undo the screw with the other. And this works equally well for putting it back on. Thanks to Matt Spagnola for showing this technique when he was assembling his Powermatic. Now the wings, the table, and all the undercarriage are all made out of cast iron. So all the rust removal I'm going to do is going to be with brass brushes. If I use anything harder than brass, it could scratch up this cast iron, which is not a big deal for the bottom of the table, but I want to be able to get myself down to a mirror finish on the top of the table. In some of these spots you can see just clouds of rust just flying up off here. And even though I edited this down to just a few minutes, the overall process took about half hour to 45 minutes per wing. Anything I couldn't get to with the spinning brush, I hit with a small fine wire brush. And a lot of this is just to knock loose scale and things in the corners out of place so that I can vacuum them up. As you can see, some of these are hard to get to. A lot of the discoloration on this table is from staining and not so much rust. I only wish I could have hooked that vacuum up to my nose to clean out all the rust that I inhaled, because dust masks are not conducive to glasses. If anybody knows a good dust mask that can be used or reused with that will not fog up glasses, I'd like to know. And now I could not find a match for the paint, so the closest we're going to get here is John Deere green. And my goal here is just to paint everything uniform and have surfaces that don't rust. Close everything off to the oxygen. Any overspray that winds up on the table will be sanded off when we go to clean up the table surface, which will probably be the very last thing I do. Here I'm just trying to get all angles and all sides, clean everything up. And like I said, we're going to be polishing up that the very top surface, so I have no problem dropping it down onto the plywood. It's still wet. Here's a couple days later after everything's dried, and I'm just doing some final touch-up. The other wing was cleaned and painted off screen.
Eventually the lights, that'll turn the lights on, but they're not set up that way right now.
It's time to move on to the actual mechanics of the table saw. All that's holding on the top of the table saw is 4 bolts in the corners. Now, normally on any other large saw, this would be used to adjust the table in reference to the blade. However, what makes this saw different is all the trunnions and all the bevels, everything is actually attached to the table. So if you rotate the table on the base, that rotates everything else too. So I'm going to have to find another way to true this up if it does need some adjustment. Now, I had to work on this for the longest time to be able to get everything off. The 2 bevel adjustments actually go through the table saw base, so I was not able to take off the top without taking these off. Here I'm just taking out a tension pin that attaches to the wheel. Did I mention how much I hate roll pins? I can never find the right size. They never go back in. They're pretty much one-time use only, and you can never find the right replacement. Yep, I hate those buggers. Here I forgot to readjust the camera, but I'm removing a roll pin also from the depth adjustment. Did I mention how much I hate roll pins? Now, the weight of this motor is going to make it prohibitively difficult to work on this tabletop or to remove it. At the bottom here, it's kind of hard to see, but I'm just removing a pin that this motor pivots on, and it was in there pretty loose, so it was pretty easy to tap out with a screwdriver. I didn't put any real force into it, so I'm not worried about mushrooming the end over. I apologize for the view, but I didn't have any other takes of this. I'd say this motor probably weighs about 30 pounds, maybe. And because the motor is attached to the switch still, I can't walk away with it. Now this circlip, I probably struggled with it for about an hour because I could not find my circlip pliers, and finally gave up and went to Harbor Freight and bought a new pair. I hate circlips pretty much as I hate roll pins. Now, I struggled with this for the longest time off camera because I didn't realize there was no bracing across the side where the motor was, and I was trying to figure out how to remove things that didn't need to be removed yet. So from here you can see the detail of the bottom. Everything is attached to the table saw table, rather than being attached to the saw base, like in most. Here I'm just cleaning up the majority of the dust. I don't know how long the saw wasn't used in. I know how old it is, and I don't know how recently things were taken apart or cleaned, so I'm just, in order to create a more clean work surface, I'm just going to start working on clearing everything off. Now, for some reason I couldn't find my 1/2-inch socket, so I tried removing a trunnion with a monkey wrench for the first time. What I also didn't realize is that the way these trunnions are built, that's just a pressure fit. So once these 2 bolts are removed, I actually could have taken that bracket right off. However, everything was so stuck together that that wasn't readily apparent. I thought there was some form of attachment still. For anybody that doesn't have an impact wrench, you can make your own by hitting a wrench with an impact hammer. I wouldn't recommend this except for things that are really, really stuck. You risk rounding over your nut or cracking it. This does put a lot of stress on the pinion for the wrench. But as you can see, it did loosen it up. And I had pretty good luck with the hammer and wrench combo through a lot of this. Like I said, a lot of these joints probably haven't been disassembled in about 40 years. Like I said before, I hadn't realized at this point that trunnion was two pieces just resting against each other, and there was nothing holding them together, so I'm taking off the other end. As far as I can tell, it's just a linkage that joins up the two trunnions. And with that removed, you can see the arbor, bearings, and the depth adjustment. Just off screen is the bevel adjustment. Here I'm removing the bevel adjustment screw. Right now I'm taking off the stop so that I can just thread it right through. In order to clean up some of my work surface, I decided to start working on some of the parts that I had removed. I used the wire wheel on all the parts inside in order to remove the rust. The indicator is a hollow tube with the depth adjustment running through the middle. Currently there's nothing holding the depth adjustment in, so I'm just threading it through so I can pull it out. All these set screws were metrically threaded because I only had a standard set, so I was actually able to take them out with a Torx bit. And because of the rust on the rod, I had to tap this out with dead blow. By the way, dead blow hammer is one of those tools you need to have in your shop. I'm just threading the set screws back into the collars so that I don't lose them. As you can see, the other trunnion just pops right loose, because once again there was nothing holding it in place. Now, after fiddling around with this indicator for a couple hours, I finally realized that there was a set screw that I had been missing because it was packed in with sawdust. So as soon as I loosened that up, that popped right off. It was just a simple matter of removing the nut on that tube, and then the indicator was completely removed. This last trunnion support was quite a bugger. I guess I could have done it with the bevel still attached and just rotated it in order to get to it. Right now I'm using the still attached trunnion support to put back pressure on it. And I finally got it popped loose. Not the recommended disassembly procedure, because I do believe I chipped out the very last tooth on the bevel, but it's something that will never be used. This bolt on the bottom here is just a set screw that holds the rod for the anchor, or for the depth pivot. At this point in my shop build, if you're watching this in the future at some point, I had no tool benches, I had no vices, I had nothing set up in here, so that's why I'm working right on the surface of the cast iron. And here I finally found my 1/2-inch ratchet, and I was able to remove the rest of the trunnion support. I guess in the future, if I need to true up the blade to the miter slots, then these bolts will be where I have to make these adjustments. I pretty much lucked out when I was working on this saw, because the only parts that were seized up was one of the bearings. Everything else came apart pretty readily. And if it wasn't because I was cleaning out everything, I wouldn't have even needed to disassemble this trunnion assembly. At this point, I'm using the screwdriver for some leverage and just wrenching apart that joint. I'm not worried about cracking or deforming anything.
Ooh, shims.
And there's a couple wobble washers in there to keep tension so that there's no play in the arbor. I'm just removing the set screw that holds on the pulley. And then I'll be using a screwdriver and dead blow for a little bit of leverage and pop that pulley right off. Now, if I wasn't replacing the arbor, this would not be the most intelligent thing to do because I did put some good scratches on the arbor. But that whole thing is getting replaced. There's a lot of threads that are stripped out on the saw, and actually the previous owner had been using a spacer block to use more threads. Now this is held straight by a key, which was embedded and stuck inside the end of the pulley, but it just popped right out. This is a couple days later, after I did some more shopping, because I still had electrical to do out in the shop. This retaining nut was barely finger tight, which might explain why there's some slop in the arbor. I didn't have a ratchet big enough to remove it, but monkey wrench turned on its end works just like a screwdriver. And here it was just held up by that little burr that I threw up when I was removing it with a screwdriver and dead blow. All the parts that I removed got the same treatment as far as the rust removal, vacuuming. The bottom of the table, even though it was exposed to moisture, it didn't have water directly dripping on it, so there was very little, if any, to rust on the bottom of the table. So it's not even going to get treated.
So after a couple days of screwing around with this enough, I finally was able to just take a regular metal hammer, tap that piece right out of there, and then I was able to put this down on the cement and use the old arbor to tap that out. So it didn't take too much force, but it definitely took more force than the dead blow could offer. And it looks like we did okay. We didn't crack any of the cast iron. So not bad for a free saw. So far I'm still good on parts, only 40 bucks spent. The bearing that's on here, it does have a decent amount of spin to it. You can hear a little bit of buzzing in there. This one is completely shot. It's all cogged up and won't move. So we're going to clean up this the rest of this stuff and spray paint it to protect it and rust proof everything before we get going on putting the new bearing and arbor in.
Things are getting a little confusing at this point, and I actually had to go back through and rewatch the video, but I separated out all the nuts and bolts into a Plano box and labeled where they go. But even then, I'm going to probably have to reference this video for reassembly. Like I said, everything got the same rust coating, and then all the cast iron parts just got coated with some gloss black spray paint, something to seal out the moisture. And then any threads got taped off, and the inside of the arbor where the tolerances are going to be really tight. I wanted to make sure I didn't get any paint in there either. After all this was done, I actually took the mount for the arbor and took that inside along with the bearing and arbor, because we got quite a cold snap and it was down in the single digits for a while, and I was worried about pressing that bearing in with the metal being too cold. And Also, being able to have all the other parts at room temperature allows me to manipulate the expansion and contraction of the metal and be able to press the bearing in without much effort. Laying on the board is just a crumpled up nitrile glove that I'd used already, and that keeps the trunnion supports from rolling away. And this is going to conclude part 1. In part 2, we're going to tackle reassembly and pressing that bearing in. If you want to be informed when the new video comes out, make sure you hit the subscribe button and click that bell for the notification.